Welcome back to our final week of COMM250, Writing for Converging Media. We've covered a lot of ground this semester, and you should feel proud of all of the new skills you've managed to absorb. We started 17 weeks ago, just trying to figure out what converging media even means in the first place. And we saw that as technology evolved into the magic black boxes we all now carry in our pockets, as Henry Jenkins so clairvoyantly called them, the various forms of communications converged and coalesced until mass media, telecommunications, and information technology intermingled into one mushy thing called the internet. Suddenly, consumers could become producers. And with this convergence of technology came the divergence of authority and all of its complications, in which citizen journalism and the DIY movement opened up technological and entrepreneurial possibilities we never could have dreamed of, but also disrupted countless industries, eroded brand loyalty, and led to the proliferation of things like fake news and disinformation. Now, the old one-to-many model of communications was no more, giving way to a new many-to-many paradigm. Now, it turns out that the practice of journalism would prove to be a very useful skill. After all, it teaches all of the transferable skills that anyone of just about any profession would need to know to be able to thrive in convergence culture, and maybe to even set right some of the pitfalls that convergence opened up. But we quickly discovered that business as usual was anything but usual in the journalism industry. With the advent of ad revenue, the fear of fake news, and the messiness of the many-to-many, well, business as usual in the journalism industry went kablooey. Didn't know I could do that. Okay, good to know. Where was I? Right. So we decided to dive in, armed with that information, and try and figure out how to even do this in this messy environment. So we decided to try and find our audience. And we started out with simple things like the 5 W's and 1 H, who, what, where, when, why, how, and foci, the interest elements that might help us capture our audience's attention, and try and use them to pinpoint who our audience is and what makes them tick. That way, we could break our audience into different segments, be they geographic, demographic, or psychographic, all in hopes of figuring out what journalistic beat we would like to cover, whether thematic, geographic, or conceptual. This would then lead us to the ability to write different types of articles, including hard news, features, op-eds, reviews, or sports. Once we did that, we were able to then take our 5 W's and 1 H and foci and zero them in on the facts of our articles, because, after all, an article is nothing with no facts. Speaking of facts, we quickly decided we would have to get some of those. So we went to sources. And sources brought all of their own baggage, such as having special interests and biases and all kinds of different problems. But we tried to find the best primary, quotable secondary, unquotable secondary, or background sources out there in order to uncover facts. Now, we also had to do our due diligence to make sure that with these facts, we don't assume, we don't extrapolate, we give adequate context, and we get all of the subtleties and technicalities correct. Only then could we hope to become tour guides through the postmodern haze of Wikipedia knowledge. Once we had our audience, we needed to figure out how to write for them. So we went back to the very beginning, the building blocks of grammar, and we started constructing sentences one part of speech at a time. From proper nouns to participial phrases, from proper nouns to okay, maybe we're getting too good at these building blocks. From proper nouns, adverbs, Okay, this is starting to get a little bit out of hand. I know. All right. Knew that would come in handy. Okay, where was I? Right. We decided we needed to build these blocks of our sentences in order to become right, tight, clear, active, smooth, and quick in our writing. Of course, nothing is that simple in convergence land, and so in order to apply good writing to journalistic context, we had to get a little more nuanced in our reading. So with the help of people like Strunk and White, our good friends of grammar, we dug in deeper and tried to figure out what makes good writing tick. But we couldn't end the conversation quite there, because as we dug into the Associated Press style book, we started to notice a lot of discrepancies between these two grammatical Goliaths. And we watched some videos that proved that language is not so easily reducible to a set of rules. As these rules constantly get rewritten, we find ourselves exploding everything we thought we knew. That one kind of hurt. And we found that in applying a set of rules, we need to strive for clarity and context over correctness. So, with that under our belt, we had everything we needed to start writing an article. So, we needed to figure out just what makes a journalistic article in the first place. So we dove into various structures for journalistic writing, such as our good friend, the inverted pyramid. Armed with this and other handy structures for journalistic writing, we were able to match them up to different types of articles: hard news, features, reviews, op-eds, and the all-encompassing sports. And learn how to apply some stylistic best practices. And before long, we had some really strong bodies to our articles. That led us to week 7 when we took on leads and headlines, pardon the pun. Headlines and leads would be able to distinguish our work from the crowd, set us apart from the many, and get people the facts that they need in the best way possible. And so we learned a lot about hard leads for hard news and anecdotal leads for features and other types of structures. And we topped off our article with appropriate headlines to vie for our heavily distracted audience's attention. Finally, we were able to move on with our articles and then take a step back and refine our approaches to writing these articles, making sure that we're keeping in mind all of the ethical and legal gray areas that come into play in journalism. We looked at some famous case studies involving these ethical debacles and wrestled with them ourselves in order to figure out how to best prepare ourselves to handle these uncomfortable situations when they arise in our own lives. So, we took a brief foray into the philosophical world of ethics and mapped out some tried and true models for figuring out just what is going to determine what's right or wrong. All in hopes of being able to make for ourselves a personal code of ethics that would act as a moral compass in those times of uncertainty. And lastly, we figured out, now that we figured out what we should do, we had to check ourselves and figure out a little bit about what we are legally allowed to do. So we learned a little bit about things like defamation, privacy, and copyright law, and how to avoid falling into these problems. At long last, we were ready to put all our knowledge to the test with our midterm exam. What could possibly go wrong? What? Oh geez. Alright. Okay, right. The corona apocalypse. Okay, so I gotta figure this one out now. Let's see here. Get a little Zoom action going. Okay, let's see. Who's this? Moodle. Yeah, that'll probably come in handy. Let's let them in. Okay, get Moodle in here. All right, there we go. Well, here we are in the even more converged landscape of distance learning, where time and space are but a statistic. Which I guess explains why it's suddenly dark here behind me. I guess that probably also means I don't really need this, socially distanced by the internet and all. Well, I applaud your adaptability. If you take COMM250 editing and converging media, you will quickly see that adaptability and being able to handle a learning curve is the name of the game in convergence culture. So, here we were in week 10, pressing on with our virtual midterm. And in week 11, we decided to take our show on the road and adapt our writing skills for broadcast. Fittingly enough, learning to write for audio and video. Let's see, someone else is in here still waiting to get in. Okay, yeah, stuff you've learned. Yep, that sounds appropriate. All right, we'll let them in. Okay. Well, we dove into broadcast journalism and found out what the conventional formats for broadcast actually were, and decided that we needed to learn some new skills as far as how to write for broadcast. And so we dug into those skills, writing for the ear, seeing how we should adapt our structure and our style in order to write our hard news and features and other styles of writing for audio and video. In week 12, we refined our skills of talking to our sources by learning how to interview a little bit better. From trying to figure out how to get our source to actually talk about our agenda, even while making them feel like they're talking about their own, to figuring out how to ask the right questions. And we looked at some great examples of some really stellar interviewers, myself maybe included, maybe not. All in all, we capped it off with perhaps one of the best interviewers of them all, Stephen Colbert, and we watched what he does right in order to figure out how to get the most out of our sources. That, of course, brought us to week 13, where, again fittingly enough, we learned how to go from print to web. It's no easy task to adapt a journalism that's been around for millennia to a new virtual environment. But we talked about the rise of blogging and how that would change writing for the web and how we should adjust our writing. And with that, we talked about how blogging has evolved the medium of journalism and ushered in a new era of social interactions on the internet, which would lay the groundwork for what would eventually be social media. Springboarding right off of that, in week 14, we started looking right at social media. We discovered that even though there are some things that seem like no-brainers and platforms we've all gotten very used to, we have to pay very close attention to the culture of each social media platform, because all social media platforms are not created equally. And so figuring out how to choose the right social platforms and how to adapt our writing, in fact, journalism or not, any writing for social media, became a really tricky proposition. And so we spent the next week, week 15, figuring out how to write exactly for that social media landscape. And it's no small task. It ties into our deepest fears and our deepest concerns, our matters of ontological existence, the urge to create something of an individual of ourselves. And so with that in mind and all the sensitivities that come with it, we talked about just how to cook up the perfect recipe for a social media post. All in all, that brought us back to week 16 and 17, where here we are working on our final projects. And so I have to say, congratulations, you've made it. With all of this in hand, your toolbox is brimming with convergence. I hereby dub thee fledgling journalists. Get it? Fledgling? Because fledglings are birds, and birds, CSE, eagles. Never mind. By the way, this is actually Brigadier Sir Nils Olav, a king penguin who was knighted in 2008. He was promoted to a member of the Norway's Royal Guard and actually performs inspections on the soldiers. Wow, the lengths I'll go to for a pun. Sorry, I can't help it. Sometimes I just get this burning sense inside of me, this urge that won't go away until it feels like I'm just gonna explode with... Oh yeah, that's okay, I definitely broke it. Good thing I am also the editor. Yep, that's backpack journalism at its finest, ladies and gentlemen. I am the writer and the editor in a converged landscape, putting out fires all over the place, even the ones I created myself. See what I did there? Yeah. Okay, anyway, now then. What we're going to do next is we're going to take a look at one last TED Talk that will help frame our final conversation about what we can do with all of this knowledge that we've gained. Because after all, this is about more than just completing a homework assignment. What we are learning endeavors to actually help us change the world, hopefully for the better, in substantial ways. So take a look at this Megan Kemerick TED Talk in the next segment, and then we'll go out with a bang. Yeah, why not?